Hello guys, welcome to this new video for this week. We have been talking about the narrative discourse. So what we are going to cover right now has to do with something that we studied a little bit in the composition class, reading and composition, at least with the people who were with me back then. So for you, it will be a little bit of a review. For everybody else, I don't know if maybe you were able to cover that in your respective classes. If you didn't, well, might be something new, right? Anyway, it's something quite simple, so we're not going to take a long time. As I mentioned back then, when I was teaching you that class, the idea is that we are going to go a little bit deeper on these ideas in this course. So this is like the introduction to this, and then we have something a little bit more complex related to it. So if you can be so kind and go to the slide number 90, you are going to see something that's called the internal structure of narrative sequence. Basically, this is going to let us know if we can consider a text to be narrative or not. So it's a little bit sort of filter similar to the speaking. Remember, we have the speaking for identifying if a body of writing is a text or not. So in this case, all these components are going to help us realize if something or a text in particular can be considered narrative or not. Okay, so as you can see, this has 5 components, and we're going to go over them one by one. Okay. Usually when I explain this, I use something that everybody knows, which is a fairy tale, right, or like a fable. So let's try to use maybe Snow White or Little Red Riding Hood or any of those for you to apply that, right? So let's start with the first one. The first component for a text to be narrative is the temporality. And let's take a look at what it says. It says the time in which a sequence of events in a story progresses, right? So basically it is the time in which the story happens. Now, these may have like different connotations, right? So we can be talking about a specific year, right? So the story gives you explicitly 2010, 2020, I don't know, 1984, 17th century, 2nd century, something like that. Okay. Now it can be less explicit. The story can tell you in a distant future, in the past, a long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, or something like that, right? So you understand certain things that are, let's say, it has to do with time, but you don't have an exact year. Then again, the text may not give you any explicit thing. I mean, doesn't have like a mention of the time explicitly. So let's go with the tale that we are discussing now, with the fable or the fairy tale. So let's think about Snow White, right? Do they tell you like in the century, etc., or the year, whatever? No, they don't mention that, right? So it's impossible to determine what is the time. No, you're smart people, so I know that you are able to do it, right? So it is a time in which there are carriages, and there are princesses and queens and kings and knights, and everything seems to be, not very technologically advanced. They don't normally mention cell phones unless there's like a modernized version or something like that. They don't talk about computers or something like that. They are always discussing about rural landscapes, the forest, the somehow that may be close to a castle or a mine or things like that. So with all those details, even though the story itself doesn't mention a specific year, you can determine that that may be more or less the Middle Ages, right? The Dark Ages sometimes is called as well. They are called as well, right? So this temporality may be about time itself, years, right? Then again, this temporality may deal with times of the day. Yes, so it may be morning, or it may be afternoon, midday, night, early morning, something like that, right? Again, they can mention it explicitly, or they can mention that somehow in a suggested way. And again, just like when they're dealing with, let's say, complete times, we can have many. Yes, let's say during the whole story from beginning to end, there may be different times. There may be different moments in which we speak of the morning and then in the night or something like that. Or maybe it's just a story that happens in only 1 year or in 1 month or in one part of the day, right? Also, when we discuss about time, we can deal, for example, with seasons, right? Winter or summer or any of those. That's also valid, right? So they can describe all these different things, and for everything it may be, let's say, it may be combined, or it can be explicit, or it can be just very general. Okay. Now, if you take a look at the slide, you will see over there a couple of things in the parentheses, right? It's linear, nonlinear, analepsis, and prolepsis. So let's discuss the first two terms. Linear has to do with the story that has the traditional composition of tales, beginning, middle, and ending. So we have a situation that starts, then it gets problematic. There's like a knot in there, or a plot that requires to carry out, and a resolution. Yes, that it's a typical linear one. It goes from the past until the future somehow, or let's say even if we're using only past, so let's say that there is a linear progression of events, 1, 2, 3, 4 until the end, right? Then when we're discussing about non-linear, it means that all the times are mixed. Well, not all, maybe 2, right? But at least 2 are mixed, right? So for example, we can have those typical stories in which we begin with the ending. Yes, the final situation is described first, and then the author tells us like what is how did we arrive at that point. Yes, so if we think about Crónica de una muerte anunciada, for example, by Garcia Marquez, we see that we start with the death of Santiago Nazarin there, or if we think about movies such as Kill Bill, maybe. So we see that the bride is somehow having a fight or something like that, and then later on we are explained that she was left for dead, almost killed, etc. And you can find 1,000 different examples in the books that you're reading, or any other thing, a movie, TV series, whatever that you have watched before, right? So that will be the difference between linear and non-linear. Then we have these two concepts that have a really fancy name, analepsis and prolepsis, and those are basically, let's say, more technical names for flashbacks and flash forwards. Okay, so a flashback is basically a memory that you have of an event that it's in the past, and it is a narrative resource. Yes, let's say that a character, it's, I don't know, in his adult life or her adult life, and let's say most of the story takes place in there, but then he or she has a memory, and she or he remembers certain things that happened when she was a kid, or when he, I don't know, was working the day before, the week before, 2 years ago, etc. Right? And the prolepsis are the flash forwards, right? So normally this is like a glimpse into the future. Yes, I am in the present, 2020, And then for some reason I know what is going to happen in 2022. It I mean, they may come in the way of premonitions, that is also a narrative resource, maybe um, prophecies, predictions, things like that, right? Like those are pretty common in literature, in narrative, so those are possibilities. So this is temporality, guys. Hope it's clear. Then let's go with the second component, that is the theme unity. Uh, I always emphasize in this, probably my former students remember that. Please don't get confused with the topic. Don't, I mean, for some reason, uh, it was named in this confusing way, theme unity. But actually, this has to do with the characters. Okay, doesn't have to do with the topic or with the themes. No, it has to do with the characters. So we require, in order to have a narrative, at least one subject actor, yes, or one character. How can you do that? Well, you can have a monologue, yes, and tell stories about something it happened to yourself, or reflections about yourself, etc. Right? That is the minimum amount that we require. Now, what is the most common? The most common is that we have at least two, no? So there is an interaction, there is a relationship between the two characters, and the story can progress in a more natural way. And then, what is even more typical? Well, take a look at your books. They are full of characters, right? So we require 5, 6, 7, 10, 20, 30 characters in a whole book in order to create an interesting plot and a narration that is more or less, let's say, engaging, right? Now, these characters can be animate or inanimate. So this animate is simply the regular character who is a person who plays a role. So Alice in Wonderland, or Coraline in Coraline, or the Pirates of Coraline, or any of those that you can think of, right? Now, what are the inanimate characters? It's very important that you take this into account and that you understand the differentiation. Inanimate may be an object, an animal sometimes, a tree, yes, sometimes even a feeling, yes, that is personified, that is given characteristics of humans. So they are happy, or they are villainous, or they may feel envy, or they may fall in love, or they, I don't know, whatever, right? So think about the objects in Beauty and the Beast, right? So we have all these candle holder and the clock, and we have tables and mugs and all these different things, right? But they are personified. Yes, they have these characteristics over there. Other example, a tree who's able to talk. Some of them move, some of them are just static, but they are able to talk and have different expressions and things like that. I don't know. Think about every single Pixar movie. So cars, planes, were toys, yes, where they are animate, yes, and eventually feelings, yes. So they are like so far fetched on their vision that they have even given yes, sure, personalities to feelings, yes. So we have this movie Inside Out, when we have anger and happiness and joy. I really don't remember the names, but basically those are feelings with human nature or human expressions, right? Now, what is not a character? Because this is something that may be confusing for some of you, right? So, for example, you can think about a very important item in a book or in a story, but it doesn't have any personality, yes? So that is not a character, right? So let's think about the ring in the Lord of the Rings. Really, really important item, but doesn't really act or talk or speak or act in any way. Well, anyway, it would be far-fetched, but not pretty much as a human, so that is not a character. Let's think about, for example, um, the swords and Harry Potter, or the wands or something like that. Yes, even though they are attributed at some point certain characteristics, and they say that they are choosing their masters or something like that. Well, that is a really important item. Wands or swords or cloaks, um, but they are not characters, right? I don't know, the poisoned apple in Snow White, really important item, something that changed the course of events, but not really a character. Okay, so hopefully we we understand like this little difference, right? Then we can have characters that are individual or collective. Again, the individual is uh, the traditional character that has his or her own identity, his or her own name, and the typical protagonist, right? So one more time, let's talk about Alice, or let's talk about Snow White, or Cinderella, or any of those, or Belle, or well, whatever, right? So they are individual characters. But sometimes we have collective characters, right? So, for example, if we talk about the Senate in one particular story, let's say Star Wars, right? Or any other place, any other story that has a political um, group or something like that. So they don't have individual, let's say, faces sometimes. Um, they can just act as a collective group and not necessarily have like a representative or something like that. So you can talk about that. Yes, we can talk about, for example, Big Brother in the book 1984. That is always suggested that it's not one person but a group of people that watches all the time the actions of others and sort of control and monitor, but we don't know the individual identity, right? So that can be probably a good example in there, and so on and so forth, right? So whenever there is like a group of people, I mean, you can say FBI, CIA, I don't know, Anonymous, right? So you know that they are collective. It's a group of people somehow that act at unison sometimes, but that you don't really like have knowledge of their individual features. So that can be a collective character. Finally, it can be active or passive. Well, that's pretty simple. Either they participate actively, they are somehow producers of actions in the story, in the narration, or passive. They just, are there. They are barely mentioned, but they don't have a lot of, let's say, influence on what is happening. Okay, so that's the second one, the immunity. Number 3, really, really important, transformation. In order to have a narration, you need to have an initial state and a final state, and you need to find some change. Okay, so either the character goes from happiness, like Little Red Riding Hood when she's jumping around the forest and saying hello to the flowers, to sort of terror or fear when the wolf revealed to herself, to her, sorry, and relief, for example, when she is rescued, right? So you see, transformation. In this case, they are very extreme, yeah, but sometimes they can be, a little bit subtle, no? So a character that feels a little bit more mature every time that you advance into his or her story. So let's think about again Harry Potter and how he and his friends change, mature, and have like slight changes from one book to the next or one movie to the next. If you have, that's what you have watched. Things like that. Yeah. Now think about, for example, Charles Dickens and Oliver Twist, for example, how he was a poor little kid and eventually his life improved. Yes, he was orphaned and really poor, and then his life got better. Something that really happened again with, for example, Great Expectations. Same thing. A man that was, well, a young man that had no work, no job, I mean, and no fortune, and eventually got better, right? So this transformation, this change is very important. We need to have that, and normally we have many of those. Yes, throughout the story or throughout the narration, we have a lot of changes, but the minimum that we require is one. Okay, otherwise it's not a narration; it's a description. Now, number 4, action unity. Please pay close attention to 4 and 5 because sometimes people confuse them. Okay, so let's take a look at the number 4, and hopefully when we arrive to number 5 you are going to see some difference. Okay, so action unity is the quantity of moments, or as many moments in which you can divide the narration. Yes, so again, you require a minimum of 2 because you need to have change, right? So you have to have an initial state and a final state, but then you can have more. Yeah, so let's go back to Little Red Riding Hood, and these are the 4 or 5 moments in which we can divide that narration. Yes, for example, we can say that the first moment was when she was taking the food to her grandma, going out of her house. Moment number 1. Moment number 2, when she finds the wolf in the forest. Moment number 3, where the wolf devours her, and moment number 4, where when the huntsman is able to save her, right? So I am being very I'm doing only the essential in here, right? But if I would want, I could divide it even in more moments. Yes, so I can say that moment 1 was that she was going to her grandma's house, and moment 2 was going into the forest. But then I can add an additional moment in which there's conversation between the wolf and her, and the wolf says that he knows a shorter way, and then I can add the moment in which she arrives to her grandma and eats her and disguises as herself, and then I can add the other moment in which there is this conversation between the wolf and Little Red Riding Hood, and she says, "Oh, why do you have such a big eyes?" and things like that, right? So you see, I have already like 7 or 8 moments. Yes, because I went into details. But if you want to just summarize it, you can do it in 2 or 3 moments, right? Again, remember that these components are to verify that we're dealing with a narrative text, right? So if you see that it has 2 or 3 moments of action unity, you will say, "Oh yes, so that's pretty good." Yes. Now, somebody already remarked on this, but think about components of the speaking, right, that have more or less the same thing, right? So you will see that there are correspondence between certain one of the letters of the speaking, which is which one? Okay, that one, and this, and the action unity. Okay, so remember, action unity, the moments in which the narration can be divided. And finally, we have the causality. Okay, so it's not casuality. No, it's causality. It's not casualty. They are different because we're dealing with cause and effect. So that is why it's called causality. So basically, this causality is exactly that, cause and effect. Why is it that certain things happen in the story, right? So basically, this causality is what connects the point number 4, the moments of point number 4, or the component number 4 between them. Yes. So the component number 4, the action unity, has to do with the moments. Yes, all these moments, and the causality has to do with the connection between them. Why? Yes. So for example, if you said that Little Red Riding Hood was in the forest, yes, the causality would be why? Oh, because she was sent, sorry, to deliver some food to her grandma. Okay, very well. Yes. Now, if you go to another one, such as she was devoured by the wolf, right? Why? What is the causality of that? Well, because she was deceived. She was somehow tricked by the wolf, and in the meantime, the wolf ate her grandma and replaced her, right? And so on and so forth, right? So this causality is always a cause and effect thing, right? Now, if you have many moments, you are going to have a lot of causalities as well, right? Now, for the exercises that we're going to be doing, just take into account that you need to explain 2 or 3. There's no need to explain a lot because this gets pretty long. And remember that this is like an instrument for knowing if we're dealing with narration or not. So that's basically it. So with 2 or 3 that you can explain would be more than enough. Okay. But well, guys. So with this, we're finished with content for this week. I am grading currently I will grade the exams. So that is why this week we have only one assignment. But for next week, what we are going to do is that you are going to create the internal structure of narrative sequence of your first book. By then, you will have already you're supposed to have already read it and finished, so you're able to do that, yes, to find the internal structure of narrative sequence. So that will be the first assignment for the next week. I am explaining it like right now, in case anybody like feels like doing it in advance or something like that, but that is what we're going to do, okay? So simply make a little list, right, of what time does your story take place, what are the characters, if it is let's say linear or non-linear, if there are flashbacks, and give me a couple of examples and things like that, okay? Next week I will hopefully explain a little bit more, but that's something that you can start working in right now, okay? So that's it. We have only one assignment for this week, number 9. And hopefully you will be able to do it in no time. So thank you very much, and see you around. Bye bye, hacks.